Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My friend group from college stayed tight over the years. We'd hang out most weekends, grab drinks, play some games. One of the guys in our circle had a cousin who'd been battling cancer for months. The whole family was going through a rough time and we all felt for them. My former friend decided he was going to organize this big gesture of solidarity. He wanted our entire friend group to shave our heads to show support for his cousin. Cancer is horrible and I wanted to help however I could. But shaving my head wasn't an option for me, especially with my job. When he brought up the idea, I told him I couldn't do it because of my work situation. I suggested donating to the treatment fund instead, but he said that wasn't the same thing. He said this was about showing we were all in this together. He'd already convinced 3 other guys in our group to go along with it. They were all in different situations. One worked remotely, another was between jobs, and the third was a teacher on summer break. None of them had the same professional constraints I did, but my former friend wouldn't let it go. He kept bringing it up every time we hung out. Then one evening, he showed up at my apartment with a whole shaving kit, acting like it was already decided. He told me it was time to get it done and that he'd brought everything we needed. I reminded him that I'd already said this wasn't happening and that I couldn't do this with my job. He called me selfish and said this was bigger than my job. I explained that it wasn't being selfish, that I had client presentations the next week and my boss would flip if I showed up bald. He brushed off my concerns, saying hair grows back and this was about supporting family. I stood my ground that night and he left pretty frustrated. A couple of weeks later, one of our mutual friends was throwing a house party. It was a Saturday night and I'd had a long week at work. I decided to really let loose for once. I'm usually pretty careful about my drinking, but that night I just kept going. By midnight, I was completely wasted. I remember bits and pieces, laughing with people, playing beer pong, then feeling really dizzy. The next thing I knew, someone was shaking me awake on the couch. One of the friends at the party was trying to wake me up, asking what was happening. I opened my eyes, still drunk and confused. My former friend was standing over me with an electric razor in his hand, grinning like an idiot. There were chunks of my hair scattered on the floor around the couch. I asked him what he was doing in my confused state. He said he was just helping me make the right choice and that I'd thank him later. I tried to sit up, but I was still too drunk to move properly. He'd already shaved off a huge section from the left side of my head and had completely removed my right eyebrow. Other people at the party had gathered around, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable. The party host told him this wasn't cool and that I hadn't agreed to this. My former friend just shrugged and said I get over it, claiming that sometimes you have to make tough choices for the people you care about. I was furious but couldn't do anything in my condition. The damage was already done, my hair looked like a lawnmower had attacked it. There was no fixing it. I had to shave the rest off just to look somewhat normal. The next morning when I was sober and could think clearly, I called the police. What he'd done was assault, plain and simple. He'd physically altered my body without consent while I was incapacitated. During the investigation, some interesting details came out. My former friend had been on medication for bipolar disorder for years but had stopped taking it months earlier. His family knew about this but hadn't told anyone in our friend group. When the police arrested him, his attitude changed real quick. He told the officers he was just trying to help his family and that it was just a prank that went too far. The officer explained that what he'd done was assault and wasn't a prank, but the real nightmare started when his family got involved. His mother began calling me constantly, trying to get me to drop the charges. She'd call and tell me I was destroying his life over hair, asking if I had any compassion. I'd explain that what he did was wrong and that he had no right to do that to me. She'd go on about how he was going through a hard time with his cousin's illness and asking if I couldn't understand that. I'd tell her that didn't excuse what he did and that I wasn't dropping the charges. When the calls didn't work, she started showing up at places I went. The grocery store, my gym, even my office building. She'd corner me and try to guilt me into changing my mind. She'd say this was tearing their family apart, that his cousin was dying and now I wanted to ruin his life too. I'd tell her I didn't ruin his life and that he made his own choices. She'd call me vindictive and cruel, asking what kind of person I was. I reported the harassment to the police, but that only made things worse. About 2 weeks after the original incident, she showed up at my apartment door. I could see through the peephole that she looked agitated. Karen was pounding on the door, yelling that she knew I was in there. I told her through the door that she needed to leave and that I'd already said I wasn't dropping the charges. She screamed that I was destroying her son's future and that it was just hair. I reminded her that my hair was important to me and what her son did was assault, then asked her to please leave. She completely lost it. She started pounding on the door and screaming at the top of her lungs, calling me a selfish piece of garbage and saying I knew nothing about what they were going through. I opened the door to tell her I was calling the police, and that's when she struck. She slapped me hard across the face, then immediately kicked me in the groin. When I doubled over in pain, she kicked me several more times in the ribs and back. My neighbor witnessed the whole thing and yelled at her to stop while announcing they were calling the police right now. Karen must have realized what she'd done because she took off running down the hallway. My neighbor, who'd seen everything, stayed with me until the police and paramedics arrived. I had to go to the hospital with a black eye, bruised ribs, and some nasty bruising in other places. The security camera my landlord had installed captured most of the assault, which made the case pretty straightforward. Karen had been taking self-defense classes for years, which the judge took into consideration during sentencing. She got 6 months in jail, 2 years probation, and had to pay all my medical bills plus damages. The judge told her she was a trained individual who used those skills to assault someone, emphasizing that this was not self-defense. Karen tried to defend herself by saying she was just trying to protect her family and that I was destroying their lives. The judge explained that wasn't how our legal system worked, and that she had no right to take matters into her own hands. She broke down crying when the judge announced the sentence, especially when he mentioned the money she'd have to pay. She sobbed that she couldn't afford it, and that it wasn't fair. The judge told her she should have considered what would happen before she assaulted me. Around this time, I heard that the cousin with cancer had passed away. I felt bad about that. Cancer is terrible, and no family should have to go through losing someone that way. But it didn't change what my former friend and his mother had done to me. My former friend got probation and community service for the original assault. He cut contact with everyone in our friend group and eventually moved out of state. I was glad to see him go. The whole ordeal cost me professionally, too. I had to wear hats to climb meetings for over a month, and my boss kept me out of major presentations until my hair grew back properly. It took almost 6 months to get back to my normal appearance, but there was one silver lining. The $10,000 I got from the lawsuit against Karen, combined with my savings, was enough for a down payment on a house. I moved into a much better neighborhood with actual security and haven't had any problems since. At 7 months pregnant with my first child, I was dealing with swollen feet, back pain, and constant exhaustion. My husband was working late that evening, so I decided to make a quick run to pick up groceries for dinner. All I wanted was to get in and out as fast as possible so I could go home and put my feet up. The pregnancy had been challenging from the start. I worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and spending 8 hours on my feet every day was becoming difficult. My doctor had been monitoring me closely because of some early complications, and stress was something I really needed to avoid. My husband and I had been trying for years to have a baby, and this pregnancy felt like a miracle we couldn't afford to lose. That evening, I drove to the busy shopping center near our apartment. The parking lot was packed for a Friday evening. Cars were circling, waiting for spots to open up. I joined the slow procession, my hands gripping the steering wheel, while I navigated through the maze of vehicles and shopping carts. After about 10 minutes of driving around, I spotted a car with its reverse lights on about 30 feet ahead. I waited as the driver loaded their groceries and got in. Finally, they started backing out. I put on my turn signal and slowly moved forward to claim the spot. When I was carefully maneuvering my car into the space, I heard someone shouting behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a woman storming toward my car. She was middle-aged with short blonde hair and was wearing a business suit. Her face was twisted with anger. The woman yelled at me, demanding to know what I thought I was doing taking this spot. I rolled down my window, genuinely confused. I looked around to see if maybe I had missed something. I told her I was sorry and that I didn't realize someone was waiting for it. She screamed back that I was lying. She claimed she had seen me waiting there for ages trying to steal her spot. I had literally just driven up when I saw the car backing out. I had never seen this woman before in my life. I apologized again and tried to explain that I really didn't mean to cause any trouble. I said I was just trying to park my car and go to the store, but she wasn't listening. Her voice was getting louder and more aggressive by the second. She shouted that I was always taking things that didn't belong to me just because I thought I was entitled to them. She said I wasn't entitled to this spot and wasn't entitled to walk all over her. The way she was talking made it sound like we had some kind of history together, like we were old enemies. But I had never laid eyes on this woman before. I was completely baffled. I tried to tell her I thought there was some kind of misunderstanding. I explained that I didn't know her and that I wasn't waiting for this spot. I said I had just seen it open up, but she cut me off and accused me of lying again. She claimed she had been watching me circle around, trying to take what was hers. I started to feel genuinely scared. This woman seemed unhinged, and I was alone and pregnant. I slowly got out of my car thinking maybe if she could see my condition, she would calm down. I begged her to stop yelling at me. I apologized again if I had done something wrong, but said I didn't mean to. I asked if we could just go our separate ways and forget about this, but seeing me only seemed to make her angrier. Karen's face was red with rage, and she was pointing at me aggressively. She told me to look at myself, playing the victim. She said that just because I was pregnant didn't mean I gotta take whatever I wanted. I tried to back away toward the store entrance, hoping other shoppers might notice what was happening. My heart was racing and I could feel the baby moving restlessly in my belly, probably sensing my stress. I told her I wasn't trying to take anything and that I just needed to get my groceries and go home. She responded by saying that people like me were all the same. She claimed I thought the world owed me something. Before I could react, she lunged at me with a growl of rage. Her hands hit my shoulders hard, and I felt myself falling backward. Time seemed to slow down when I fell, my hands instinctively going to protect my belly. I hit the asphalt hard on my side, and a sharp pain shot through my back and hip. I cried out in pain and fear, curled up on the ground with tears streaming down my face. The baby was moving frantically now, and I was terrified something terrible had happened. Karen didn't even look back to see if I was okay. She just stormed into the store like nothing had happened. Within seconds, several people rushed over to help me. A young man knelt down beside me and asked if I was okay. He wanted to know if he should call an ambulance. I told him yes please and that I was pregnant and scared something was wrong with the baby. An older woman who had witnessed everything was already on the phone with the police. She told me she had seen the whole thing and that the woman had attacked me for no reason. She said the police were on their way. While we waited for help to arrive, other shoppers brought me a bottle of water and helped me sit up against the car. The pain in my back was intense, and I couldn't stop shaking. I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Premature labor, placental abruption, injury to the baby. When the paramedics arrived, they carefully examined me and checked the baby's heartbeat. The sound of that steady rhythm on their monitor was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The paramedic told me the baby sounded strong, but that they needed to get me to the hospital for a full evaluation. The police took statements from me and the witnesses while I was being loaded into the ambulance. Several people had seen the entire incident and confirmed that Karen had attacked me without provocation. They said she was nowhere near the parking spot when I first claimed it. At the hospital, they kept me for observation for several hours. The doctors ran tests and monitored both me and the baby closely. Thankfully, aside from some bruising and soreness, we were both okay. But the emotional trauma of the attack lingered long after the physical pain faded. The next day, I learned that Karen had been arrested inside the store. The witnesses had pointed her out to the police, and the store's security cameras had captured part of the incident. She was charged with assault on a pregnant woman which carried enhanced penalties in our state. During the court proceedings, I learned more about Karen. She had a history of aggressive behavior and had been involved in several similar incidents over the years. Her lawyer tried to claim she was having a mental health crisis, but the prosecution argued that her pattern of entitled behavior showed this was who she really was. The judge was not sympathetic to Karen's excuses. During sentencing, he spoke directly to her. He told her that her actions that day were not only criminal, but despicable. He said she had attacked a pregnant woman over a parking space that she had no legitimate claim to. He made it clear that the court would not tolerate such violence, especially against vulnerable members of the community. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The judge also ordered her to complete anger management classes and perform community service once released. When the sentence was announced, Karen finally seemed to realize the gravity of what she had done. She started crying and trying to apologize, but it was too late. My husband and I were relieved, but the incident changed us both. We installed security cameras at our home, and I became much more cautious about going places alone. The attack had been so random and unprovoked that it shattered my sense of safety in everyday situations. 3 months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The doctor said the stress from the attack could have triggered early labor or worse complications, but somehow we both came through it okay. My grandmother had this nice house with a big backyard that bordered this open grassy area we called the Green Belt. She let me stay there during summers, and it was basically paradise for a kid like me. My grandmother had always been protective of her property. She'd worked hard to buy that house after my grandfather passed away, and she took pride in maintaining it. The backyard was her special project with flower beds along the fence, a nice lawn, and enough space for me to set up my inflatable pool during hot days. She'd installed security cameras around the property after some teenagers had vandalized her mailbox a few months earlier. She wanted to make sure her home stayed safe. The green belt behind our house was this big stretch of grass that separated our neighborhood from another one. Kids would sometimes cut through it as a shortcut, and dog walkers used it regularly. My grandmother never minded people walking through the green belt itself, but she made it clear that her property line ended at the fence. She'd spend good money on those flower beds and didn't want people trampling through them. On this summer day, my friend had come over for what we thought would be a perfect pool day. The sun was beating down, probably around 90 degrees, and we'd been looking forward to this all week. We'd set up the inflatable pool the night before so it would be ready first thing in the morning. We were having the time of our lives, splashing around and playing Marco Polo. We weren't screaming or anything crazy, just normal kid laughter and the occasional game calls. The pool was maybe 50 feet from the house, right in the middle of the backyard where my grandmother had said we could put it. Everything was perfect until this woman came storming across the green belt and right onto our property. She didn't knock on the front door or try to talk to an adult. She just walked straight through my grandmother's flower bed, crushing some of the petunias, and started yelling at us. The woman screamed that she could hear us from all the way across the field and demanded we quiet down or she'd call the police. My friend and I just stared at her. We'd been playing normally, and besides, we were on private property. The woman had to have walked at least 100 yards across the green belt to get to us, so it wasn't like we were right next to her house. My friend tried to be reasonable and told her we were just playing in the pool on private property, but the woman wasn't having any of it. She shouted back that she didn't care whose property it was and that we were being too loud and disturbing the peace. I was 6 years old, frustrated, and honestly a little scared by this angry woman yelling at us, so I gave her the middle finger. I'd seen older kids do it when they were mad, and in that moment, it seemed like the right response. The woman's face turned bright red. She called me a little brat and threatened to call the police right then. She tried to walk over to the pool, probably to grab me or something, but she had to walk through this soggy area where the sprinklers had been running earlier. Her shoes were slipping in the mud, and she couldn't get good footing. She kept sliding around, getting more and more frustrated. Finally, she gave up trying to reach us and stormed off back through the green belt. But here's the weird part. As she was leaving, she started crying, like full-on sobbing as she walked away. My friend and I looked at each other wondering what had just happened. We went back to playing in the pool, thinking this crazy lady would just go home and cool off. We were wrong. About 20 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house. My friend and I were still in the pool when we heard car doors slamming. My grandmother came outside looking confused. The first officer walked into the backyard and approached us. He seemed nice enough, but he looked serious. The officer explained that they'd received a call claiming 2 kids were chasing a lady around, yelling at her and verbally assaulting her. He asked us to tell him what had really happened. My friend immediately jumped in and told him that wasn't true at all. She explained that we were in a pool when some lady came and told us to be quiet or she would call the cops, but that it was private property and she was trespassing on it. My friend insisted we weren't even being loud. I nodded along, still dripping wet from the pool, and added that the woman had walked right through my grandmother's flowers to get to us. I told him we were just playing Marco Polo. The officer looked around the backyard, taking in the scene. My grandmother mentioned the security cameras. She told the officer she had cameras that recorded everything and asked if he'd like to see the footage. The officer's eyebrows went up and he said that would be very helpful. We all went inside and my grandmother pulled up the footage on her computer. The timestamp showed everything clearly. At 2:17 p.m., you could see Karen walking across the green belt. At 2:18 p.m., she stepped onto our property and walked through the flower bed. The audio picked up her yelling at us, and you could see my friend and me just standing there in the pool, not chasing anyone or being aggressive. The officer watched the whole thing, then told us he was going to go talk to the woman who called this in. He told us to stay there with my grandmother. About 30 minutes later, both officers came back. The second officer was shaking his head and told us that the woman who called this in had been issued a citation for filing a false police report. He said she also received a warning for trespassing on private property. My grandmother crossed her arms and asked the officer if she could press charges for the trespassing and for the damage to her flower bed. She explained that the woman had crushed several of her plants. The first officer said that she absolutely could, and asked if she wanted them to proceed with that. My grandmother said yes and that she wanted the woman to know she wasn't welcome on this property. The officers went back to talk to Karen again. When they returned, the second officer had this incredulous look on his face. He told us that the woman's response to being told she can't come on our property was interesting. My grandmother asked what she had said. The officer explained that the woman had complained that her dog liked this spot. We all just stared at him. The first officer assured us that they'd made it clear that didn't matter. He said they'd formally trespassed her and that if she returned to this property, they'd take more serious action. He said that she understood what would happen. After the officers left, my grandmother explained that Karen apparently lived on the other side of the green belt. She must have been watching us from her house and decided she didn't like the noise, even though we were easily 200 yards away from her property and playing during normal daytime hours. The trespassing charge stuck, and Karen had to pay a fine for the false police report. My grandmother also made her pay for replacing the damaged flowers. We never saw Karen again after that day, though my grandmother mentioned a few times that she'd seen her walking her dog in the green belt, always staying far away from our fence. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.